2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe Libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com.
Hey everyone, it's the Last Nighters, Daniel and Robert, and we are back again talking about another movie. This is episode 40 of the show. We're going to be talking about Liar Liar with a special guest, Patrick MacFarlane of Liberty Weekly, and he has recently passed the bar exam and is now officially working as a lawyer. And so we thought that this being one of his favorite movies and him now being a lawyer, it would be a good time for us to get together and talk about a Jim Carrey movie, because he's been back in the news lately on the Bill Maher show talking about socialism and how great it is, even though he's made millions of dollars doing capitalism. Very strange man. But show notes and more can be found at lastnighters.com/40. This show is also found on the Launchpad Media, where they're always throwing new ideas in your direction. They have many exclusive shows, a different show coming out each day of the week. So do check that out at thelaunchpadmedia.com. Let's say hello to Robert, and then we will introduce our guest, and our guest can throw out his websites and everything at you, and then we'll get into the Google description. But first, Robert, how are you doing, sir? I know that you've been feeling sick because you visited Chateau Elwood and got illness from my little germ monkey kids. But I hope
thanks
you're
a lot,
doing
you
better.
son of a bitch. I'm slowly on the mend. I was having some serious body aches and pains and headaches and congestion and whatever. I was actually feeling probably okay enough to do the show yesterday, but there would have been too many sneezes and coughs and not pleasant for anybody. And thanks all to you. And I think that there's some sort of NAP violation when you invite somebody over to your house and you don't inform them that one of your little plague monkeys is currently carrying the plague, and you act as if everything's normal and fine and wonderful. And then you just cackle nefariously as I drive away, knowing that your evil deeds were successful.
Well, we have legal representation with us tonight.
Yes, we do.
In the form of Patrick MacFarlane.
So Pat, do I have a case against this son of a bitch?
Well, right. As we were talking about before in the Patreon bonus content, you might, under Wisconsin statutes, have a claim for domestic assault. Was it domestic violence?
Well, at one time, we did live together.
Right?
Yeah.
And he infected you according to, Wisconsin statutes 813? Anyways, Patrick MacFarlane here of the Liberty Weekly podcast. This is also going to be an episode of my show at libertyweekly.net/95. Really excited to be back with my good friends, Robert and Daniel of the Actual Anarchy podcast. We've been doing this podcast game for, a bit over a year now. And I started out, they were one of the first shows that I connected with as my show. So we've done the Libertarian Union together. It's always a pleasure, guys, just to be on your show. So how's it going?
It's going really good, sort of. I'm glad to have you on, buddy. Glad to have you on talking about this pretty interesting topic. I mean, I don't think that there's a lot of meat to chew on this movie, so I know you guys took a lot of notes. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to find out what you actually wrote down. But a lot of Daniel's movies lately have been kind of like nostalgia memory lane type movies where we just kind of recite quotes back and forth to each other. So I'm hoping that it's not just a quote fest, although there can be certainly a certain portion of the show devoted to that. Don't get me wrong. But hopefully there are some interesting nuggets which we can pluck out of the dying heart of this movie and discuss.
All right, dickhead. Let's get we'll get into the Google description.
They're on to me.
That was like the best part of the movie. All right. Liar Liar came out in 1997 at the peak of Jim Carrey's popularity. He was raking in $20 million a film at this point. 1 hour, 27 minutes. 6.8 on the IMDb, 81% Rotten Tomatoes, 70% of Metacritics, yet 92% of the Google users like it. And the description is, conniving attorney Fletcher Reed, played by Jim Carrey, is an ace in the courtroom. But his dishonesty and devotion to work ruin his relationships. His wife, Audrey, has left him for a more dependable man, and Fletcher often breaks the commitments he makes to his beloved son, Max. When Max wishes his dad would stop lying for 24 hours, Fletcher suddenly finds that he can only speak the truth on the day his career-deciding court case has to be won. Came out March 21st, 1997, director Tom Shadak, and came out with $302 million at the box office on a $45 million budget. What say you about the description, Robert?
That's essentially the plot of the movie. It doesn't mention how much of a Jim Carrey's slapstick comedy carries the film. I think if you take out Jim Carrey and you replace him with anybody else, it would have been a very unfunny and just nothing of a movie. You really need his star power to carry this one through. And upon rewatching for this episode, I was struck by just how little his antics moved me. I mean, at one point in time, he was the guy. He was the star. He was the big money maker. I mean, he was fresh off of In Living Color after Ace Ventura, and then he just had a string of hits that all made a ton of money and just gave him a big fat payday. And now he's screaming about socialism. But upon rewatching, this movie just didn't do it for me. I didn't laugh once. It was just really slapsticky, and the plot was really predictable. And I assume that most of the good vibes from tonight are going to be purely nostalgia based, but I'm interested to see if other people actually did enjoy it upon rewatching it, because I don't think his comedy aged well. I don't think it's as rewatchable as something like a Ghostbusters or an Airplane or even like a Spaceballs or Three Amigos or anything like that. I mean, I think this is comedy of the time. And when Jim Carrey was just this new brave voice in comedy and nobody else is quite doing this, now his stuff kind of seems a little bit played out.
All right, harsh words. Robert has thrown down the gauntlet. Your rebuttal, Mr. MacFarlane.
How many minutes do I have, Your Honor? It did not age well. I will agree. No, it did not age well. And however, like I have to disclose that Liar Liar is one of my formative movies from my youth. It made a lot of sense to me when I was, 5 to 13 or 14 years old. I think the last time I saw it was a couple years ago. There's a lot to pick at, ethically wise and professionally wise, and I made quite a few notes. But the acting wasn't very good upon second watch. I do like Jim Carrey. However, his wife in the film, Audrey, she was not very good. The kid was cute. However, Jerry, though, even the wonderful Jerry lies. Yeah, he's awful. I think my wife was saying that he seems to have a skill set more geared towards theater, the actual theater. But it was bad. I still love it though. Still love it. So,
well, you love bad movies. It's all good. But yeah, as long as you recognize that it's just not that great of a film and really rides the back of the Jim Carrey comedy wave.
Yeah, it's highly quotable though, and even I think my family will quote it back and forth. But should I? I have that Jim Carrey clip, a pretty short, 15-second clip from Bill Maher. It's all queued up in the hopper. I don't have video, but should I go for it, Daniel? Should we hear that drivel?
Yeah, let's hear the guy who made millions of dollars in a voluntary way talk about socialism.
We'll see how it is. I haven't listened to this before, but here it goes.
I grew up in Canada, okay? We have socialized medicine. And I'm here to tell you that this line that you get on all of the political shows from people is that it's a failure. The system is a failure in Canada. It is not a failure in Canada. We have to say yes to socialism, to the word and everything.
Researchers and scientists.
Wow, okay. Yeah. I hope that was loud enough for everyone. Maybe we could go back through in the mixing later and fix that. But I'm telling you, take my word for it. Socialism is not failing us in the Canadian healthcare system.
Yeah, it's so convincing. It's so convincing that in my one situation, it worked totally. And I think he goes on to say that he never had to wait for any kind of a procedure.
Oh, really? Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's what he said, and which is anything but the case. I mean, maybe in Canada, the wait lines are a little less egregious, but in any time you're talking about a socialist medical system or any kind of socialism period, you have a set pool of resources and you have basically people whose job it is to allocate said resources. And there's only so much to go around. And if you have more customers than you do resources, then there is rationing. And you've got people that are on wait lists for certain procedures or any kind of basic various procedures. Like I know this is a common example in the libertarian world, but when Stefan Molyneux had his cancer, he left Canada because to see a doctor would have taken like years to wait for one. He actually went down to like Oklahoma and saw a doctor right away, paid for it, and he's fine. But oftentimes, the poor will have to just sit and wait and oftentimes die. I mean, if you've got some kind of time sensitive thing like cancer diagnosis and you've got a 2-year wait time, you may not make it. So socialism's great, everybody.
Well, and I think Jim Carrey's an American citizen too. Yeah, I think he has dual citizenship. I don't know how that factors into it, but yeah. Well, when you have a system that's not based on any price feedback mechanism, as Mises's socialist calculation problem, you have shortages, and you have things like the USSR looking at Sears and Roebuck catalogs to decide how much goods and services goods cost. But yeah, I don't want to get too sidetracked from the movie though. But I always kind of do these things timeline, kind of a scene by scene kind of thing. So that's how I took my notes.
All right, Pat, bring it, buddy.
Right on. Okay, so I just started practicing like 3 weeks ago, and I'm going to take this opportunity to kind of talk about the things I've learned about the legal system so far, which I've learned more in the last 2 or 3 weeks than I think I did in an entire semester of law school. And you kind of realize that at least for the time being, you kind of fake it till you make it. You know, it's hard to figure these things out, and the only thing you really learn in law school is how to think like a lawyer. But right away, you kind of get this theme that everyone hates lawyers, right? I mean, let's go. Come on, lay it on me.
What is 2000? What do you call 2,000 dead lawyers at the bottom of the ocean?
A good start.
That's right, buddy.
Where do lawyers learn how to suck blood? No shit. Where do vampires learn how to suck blood? In law school. Okay. What's the difference between a carp and a lawyer? No. What is it? One is a blood-sucking bottom feeder, and the other one is a fish, right? The difference between a carp and a lawyer? Okay. So I would say that everyone hates lawyers until they need one, because there's nothing like getting served with the lawsuit and being dragged into court, because the court is a monopoly and it has coercive power over you. And I always kind of say that, like, if the court decides to dance with you, the court's like a big gorilla, right? If the gorilla is going to dance with you, it's going to dance with you whether you like it or not. And when you get served with that lawsuit, or when someone has filed an action against you that cuts off the corner of your house in a property dispute, or, you know, when someone's trying to take your kids away, or when, hypothetically speaking, your girlfriend calls you over and then slews accusations at you that you hit her, and the cops show up and believe her side and the judges believe her side too, you want a lawyer. In fact, you really need a lawyer. So your lawyer becomes your best friend. And in a lot of ways, the job of a lawyer is to be a counselor. That's why they call you counselor. You help people through the legal process and you advise them. In a lot of ways, you're kind of a social worker, because they come to you, and the one thing I've learned from my associates and not my partners, but my associates, are that the first question they ask when someone comes in the office is, "What's going on? Tell me a little bit about what's going on with you." So that's just a start, because right away in the beginning, you get Fletcher walking out of the courthouse, and everyone's like, "Oh, what a great win! What a great win!" And he's sleazing past, and he walks past this client. He's like, "Oh, Fletcher, do you want your coat back?" As he takes the suit off. And yes, you want your clients to dress well when you bring them into court.
Yeah, it seems to me that I don't necessarily think of lawyers as being evil per se. I think that they're people responding to the incentives of a monopoly system. Now, I don't know exactly where the chicken and the egg situation is, where it's lawyers making the law intentionally obtuse or politicians making the law intentionally obtuse, but it's definitely intentionally obtuse to the point at which your average human being, in fact, any human being, period, has no chance of knowing all the laws of the land. They say ignorance of the law is no excuse. I challenge any human being, including every single one on the Supreme Court, every lawyer who's ever lived. I mean, nobody knows all the laws of the land. There are people whose job it is. I mean, not even the senators who vote on the laws have even read like a tenth of the pages of the law. They get the law, and then they're like an hour later, it's like 500 pages, and an hour later they're going to vote on it. It's a complete joke. But, you know, there's no way like the average person could even begin to like understand the law, let alone defend themselves. So I understand why a lawyer would be, you know, your best friend in that situation. And it is during a very dark time. You know, it's like being accused of a crime is a horrifically, you know, damaging thing. And just even being accused, you know, it's a hit to your reputation. And then it's, you know, a massive monetary expenditure. And then even if you're found innocent, sometimes your reputation doesn't even recover. So it's a massively, you know, it's one of the worst times of your life so yeah, I could see your lawyer being a very desperate buoy to cling to in the middle of a storm. But would you say that it's, you know, lawyers really reaping the benefit, intentionally making the law obtuse so that they've got this kind of monopoly and haha, you got to pay me all this money to make sense of this crap? Or is it like, lawyers and just kind of everybody understanding, where the incentives are and this is what we get? Because this is totally a shit show. I mean, you got to admit that.
Yeah, well, I don't think that. In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no, because if you read Bruce L. Benson's The Enterprise of Law, he goes through a brief overview of the history of the Western legal tradition, and a lot of it is rooted in the Anglo-Saxon system and the handing over of the Anglo-Saxon system to the Norman kings after the Norman invasion, I think in like 1150 AD. And I've done some work on this at Liberty Weekly. Liberty Weekly and the Magna Carta, or the Magna Carta episode I did. So just go to libertyweekly.net, search Magna Carta. I'm not remembering the episode number. But he says that after the Norman invasion, the state starts to subsume all of these crimes that used to be between private individuals, and instead will prosecute them on behalf of the victim instead of the victim pursuing their own justice. So gradually private crimes become the public domain. So the state will prosecute it. And so you get a lot of that. It's a lot of revenue seeking on behalf of the king. The kings, as they're seeking, more money for wars or aggression or protection or whatever. And in this time, you get lawyers. The legal profession develops. And I don't think it's a coincidence, but the law itself becomes less accessible, more complicated, more expensive during this time that lawyers are introduced. I don't necessarily think it was a nefarious thing. I'm reading a book right now called The Law and Revolution, and it's an overview of the Western legal tradition itself. And kind of the thesis of it is that law goes in, not really in spurts. It will progress very slowly and gradually over time, but it is punctuated by violent revolutions, and especially the Western legal tradition. And so that's a very interesting aspect of it. So in one sense, I would say that the law is monolithic and it will change very gradually. So I don't think it's a very concerted effort of attorneys to make the law more complicated. I think that's just the way it has gone, and maybe subconsciously so. But yes, there are other ways in which lawyers will kind of tweak it, especially when it comes to our time, because the unit of time is your measurement as a lawyer. That's your measurement of billing. So that's kind of what you work in, is your time. And there are ways you kind of make things work. And I'm talking more hypothetically or just general things that will happen, not because lawyers want to cheat you out of their money, but that's just kind of the reality of the situation, is that, when you're billing, it's all complicated in a sense where maybe you're weighing different economic things. And this is what I'm referring to, is that you're weighing different economic opportunities. You not only have to think about your case in the legal perspective procedurally of, okay, what should I do next? Should I file this motion, or should I do this sort of thing? But you also have to think of it in terms of what your client can afford and what your client wants. So maybe what you'd like to do if you had a shitload of money and time is hire an expert witness and really pursue something. But if you did that, you would rack your client's retainer up, you'd spend it all up, and then you'd have to charge them more money, and that just wouldn't work. So those are things that really complicate things and make the law more complicated. Another thing that I would say that makes the case complicated in a way that lawyers drive it is that when you're trying to argue it to the judge really, in a lot of cases, just wants you to lay out the road ahead of them for them, so that the judges don't necessarily have to expend all this time and research thinking about a good solution to the law. They can take and this is how the adversarial process works, is that the judges don't necessarily want to think about the case as hard because they have 50 million other cases. So they will just look to the attorney that has the simpler to understand, more straightforward, and more commonsensical theory of the case itself. And they will say, aha, that's what I want to do. Therefore, you can see through the common law system how the law will develop in that direction. So I hope I was good at kind of answering your questions. I hope I didn't get too off the rails there.
I think in typical lawyer fashion, you gave us a nice big fat word salad that nobody can make sense of. So good job.
Yeah, it ties right into this movie, which the whole movie is pretty much a word salad. Now, my first note in this is Jim Carrey is a commie. So we've already kind of covered that. Right. There's a part that did hit me a little bit hard, and that was in his disappointing his kid. And this is because he worked too much and he was making all these promises to the kid, but then things would come up that would help him, promote his career, or he had to work extra hours, or he was recently divorced and his legal boss lady was coming on to him. And
Oh yeah.
He missed the birthday party, and that I think was pretty terrible. That was like an awful, like, this is a bad thing. You should not have done this. Disappointing your kid in that respect is really terrible. Now, I also want to talk about the Carrey Ewells, the guy who played Jerry.
Always
Wesley in A Princess Bride.
Right.
And in that movie, he's, he's dashing and daring, and he's the Dread Pirate Roberts, and he's a really cool guy. In this, he is an annoying as fuck beta male cuck motherfucker. Like, and I'm sorry about all the curse words, Last Nighters fans. But yeah, he was like super annoying, like beyond, and I'm sure it was an intentional thing to drive a pretty big wedge in contrast between his character and Jim Carrey's character in the love interest of the mom, of Audrey. And so they had to like exaggerate every little thing that they could to make that distinction between the two. Because this is not like a highbrow movie. This is pretty base in a lot of ways, but it also has some very overproduced bits, like overly cutesy, like the little musical quips and things like that are thrown in. Just felt super cheesy to me, like they overproduced. And I don't know if you guys picked up on that, but that was another note that I had.
That goes with the overacting theme in general of Jim Carrey, I think. And
and notice in the description they said he's an ace lawyer, and that's of course alluding to his popular turn as Ace Ventura talking out of his butt cheeks.
Oh, right.
But go ahead, Robert.
Well, I was just going to say a few words in defense of Jerry. I felt a little bit of sympathy for him as a stepfather. On a personal note, I didn't have a good relationship with my stepfather. And as an adult, I look back on it and I kind of regret all the hard times I gave him and how difficult the situation was for him to step in and, am I the father? Am I the friend? I'm going to try and discipline this person. You can't compete with the actual father, but you love him and you love the wife, and it's just a tough situation to be in. So for me, I had a lot of sympathy for the Jerry character trying to compete with the rubber man fun of Jim Carrey. He's trying to compete with him on his level, which, I mean, who could do that? I mean, he was probably better off trying to be himself, being Mr. Consistency and being Mr. There, and doing his own thing instead of trying to replace the father. But I did have some sympathy for the old poor Jer.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, Pat, I actually have a question for you. Just so we're kind of moving the show along, because we're already about halfway through our allotted time. Just so you know, I'm billing you by the quarter minute, actually. So you now being an established official lawyer working in a practice, this question is directed to you. Mrs. Cole, who is the client who is seeking the divorce from the husband and had signed a prenup, and she's trying to defeat that to get more money out of the husband. She admits to Jim Carrey's character that she's lying. She admits to the lawyer that she's lying. Is there some ethical obligation for the lawyer at this point, knowing that the client is lying, to recuse himself, to not take the case? Because it's been my understanding that you'll defend based on the facts as you know them. But once you know that your client's lying, like, aren't you kind of being unethical?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And that was one of the, I knew this would come up. That was one of the biggest quibbles with this film, is that there is, so the state bar regulates lawyers. I believe it's a private enterprise that the state gives a monopoly to in regulation of lawyers, and each state bar does that. And the American Bar Association only accreditates law schools. And this is something that I've said wrong on my program in the past, so I really wanted to correct it, because the federal ABA, American Bar Association, only accreditates law schools. They don't deal with lawyer investigations. And this has come up in the Kavanaugh thing. Actually, today, check my Twitter account. So what I found interesting about this is that in the world of lawyer ethics, the absolute worst mortal sin is dishonesty, right? Going into law school, I've known people that had former drug charges, people that had committed violent acts against others, people who had multiple OWIs, or I guess driving under the influence, depending on where you are. And they were convicted of that. They disclosed those and they were still admitted to the bar. But if you are convicted of any crime involving dishonesty or having civil judgments against you for dishonesty, that's a big, big, big no-no. And in fact, you can get disbarred pretty easily for being dishonest. So that's something that they take very seriously. And there's no way that Miranda, the attorney, could talk like that and get away with it behind the scenes. I think if you are aware that another attorney is engaged in an ethical violation, you have a duty to report them. And so that's another thing. If you know that your client is lying, you can't call them to the stand and aid in their lying. And in fact, if you have certain things, you can progress it. There's certain steps you can take. One even involves talking to the judge, because you also have conflicting obligations to your client of confidentiality. So you can take certain steps, and at the end of the day, you might have to recuse yourself from the case. There might be no way around it. Likewise, in this case, Samantha, the client, I believe her name is Samantha, she wants to take, because in every case, your client is the captain of the ship, and you, at the end of the day, are just the attorney that's shoveling coal in the boiler, moving the ship forward. Ultimately, your client steers the ship. So if you and your client honestly have a disagreement about where to take the case and you will not take it a certain way, you can petition the court to recuse yourself from the case.
Okay, so this is a screenwriter writing a script and not really having a grasp of how the legal profession really works in this regard. Because they had to make her be this gold digger, really evil person who's willing to lie, to go to any end to get whatever she wants. And this ties right into my next question. And Robert, I will direct this one to you. And then Pat, you can chime in as you will. It seems like Miss Cole is clearly aware of the advantage she has being the woman in a family court situation. And I don't know what the stats are on this, but I would have to imagine that the woman gets sided with in a very, very high percentage, like probably 90, 95%. I'm talking like child support, getting the house, getting half of everything, getting custody of the kids, all of those things. And it really seems like that is not an equal application of the law. And it's a perversion of the law that goes unchallenged. And I don't know, Robert, take it away. Just, what are your thoughts on that? Because that seemed like that was what she was using to her advantage, like this well-known kind of thing.
Right. And I think that there's a seeming precedent, and I'm speaking as a layman here, of course, but there seems to be a precedent that if there is no prenuptial agreement, then there's a certain amount of money that the husband then is owed to, or due to the wife, to maintain her level of living standard, as if you're somehow owed some level of living standard due to the amount of time you put into the relationship originally. Like there's some sort of invisible check marks that you're checking off. Like, okay, I've put in my time for 5 years. Now I'm due 5 years time of this continued life. And like that seems to be the precedent that the law takes into account and then enforces. I'd like to get Pat's position on this, because it sure doesn't live up to any kind of libertarian standard. And the law is essentially libertarian as I understand it. It seems to think that people are owed things that which they have not earned. Like there's a great bit by Bill Burr about Tiger Woods and his divorce proceedings, and like how his wife didn't help him hit any of those golf balls, couldn't hit a golf ball to save her life as well as he could, but was somehow equal and due to half of his wealth for some reason, and is now a multi-millionaire for her contribution to the family. And yeah, it seems skewed to me, and it definitely does skew towards the woman in this kind of gynocentric world that we live in. Patrick, your thoughts on the idea of women being able, being owed like restitution based on their living standards to be maintained?
Yeah, this is termed, the term of art is maintenance or alimony. Alimony is the old-fashioned term. Usually now it's called maintenance. Mostly has to do with, the theory behind it has to do that when you get married, everything from the point of marriage on is marital property, which is communal in a sense. Wisconsin is a community property state, which is the outlier. But marital property just kind of assumes that once you enter the marriage, everything that you get during the marriage is a product itself of the marriage. Unless you are getting a gift or an inheritance during the marriage, then that's considered separate property. But you think that during the marriage, you are a joint legal unit. Everything you earn during the marriage becomes part of that joint unit. And so a big part of divorce is when that marital property comes into being, then you have to divvy things up in an equitable division. And equitable doesn't always mean equal, But my boss, my mentor, he always explains it this way, is that what we're doing is we're taking things and putting them in different stovepipes. So you tackle one thing at a time, all the assets, you determine what is a product of the marriage, you put them in their own separate spheres, and then you trade them back and forth between the parties who are divorcing to try and get some kind of agreement of who's taking what and what is fair. Now,
so just to interject. So the assumption is that both parties have an equal input to the marriage and therefore deserve equal outcome of the marriage.
I think
the marriage property.
Right, yeah. So when you get married, everything you accrue after that point of marriage becomes shared between the parties. And so this concept of maintenance or alimony, usually the courts aren't as friendly towards it when the marriage is short, maybe about 5 years. Because every marriage below 5 years by the courts, at least in Wisconsin, is considered to be a short marriage. So after that, this idea is that, okay, well, the wife always contribute, or each party always contributes something, whether one party works and puts the other through school, or even if wifey is staying home and taking care of the kids or the household, excuse me, some beer. Even if the wife is at home taking care of the household during all this time, she's still, quote unquote, contributing to the marriage, because you would either have to pay someone to clean your house. And I think they actually take the rate that it would cost to hire someone on the market to clean your house, right? To figure how much the wife is owed for cleaning the house. Because in the absence of her staying home cleaning the house, so the logic goes, you would have to hire someone to clean your house or do it yourself, which if you do it yourself, that takes time away from what you can be using to put towards earning more money. So it's a catch-22 in some ways, that they're always, going to find this maintenance. And
so,
yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say that usually the question kind of goes down to how much maintenance should be and how long it should be in effect for. And we can get into custody, because custody of the children is what really makes it more complicated.
Right. So what I'm interested in, I mean, I don't know if we're going to be able to solve this tonight, but
yeah,
in a free market situation, of course we don't know the answer to this, but in a purely libertarian world type private property situation, would like alimony be a thing? Would there be some private company that comes along and like forcibly extorts money from, some guy or some lady and pays it to their ex for whatever reason? Is this a legitimate thing, or is this a state imposed thing that wouldn't exist in a private property situation?
Well, right now you're living in a system where the concept of marriage itself is monopolized by the state, and also kind of in a way subsumed by religious institutions. In a free market society, I think that the only benefit you would have, in a free market situation, there would be a separation between these two ideas. You would have a marriage as a religious or personal institution, which would have no bearing on the law whatsoever. And you could intertwine them, whereas if you wanted to solemnization is actually a requirement of common law marriage and marriage, I believe marriage itself, the ceremony itself. But in a free market situation, these concepts would be divided and they could cross over, I suppose. But the only benefit, I think, the major benefit of being legally married is to have the legal benefits bestowed upon a partner, mostly tax benefits, mostly the ability to be treated differently legally, but also to visit them in the hospital or to enter survivorship marital property, where if one of them dies, then you automatically inherit the property. So I do think that a lot in a free market situation, right, these things would be separated. But if you were married in a free market situation and wanted to get legal status, I think that prenups would be the usual. I really do. But that comes with a whole bunch of little different nuances too, because then you have all the contract formation stuff that goes into that, because essentially a prenup is a contract, so contract law would apply. So
all right.
Right, getting deep into the weeds with Pat MacFarlane.
Yeah, but it's what we do.
All right. Well, I've had better. So let's.
But you want to talk about children now? I mean,
no. Let's move it along a little bit, because we're going to run out of time here before we know it. So he does do the I've had better. So we could get into a little bit of the quotes thing here.
Right.
But when he's not able to lie any longer, he encounters a woman in the elevator, and he makes all of these lewd remarks and motions intimating that he would like to suckle on her bosom. And I'm wondering if that situation, when viewed today, because this movie did not age well, in light of the Kavanaugh thing and the Me Too and all this other stuff, if that would have been considered elevator rape.
Yeah, I don't see why it wouldn't. I mean, it's a strange scene anyway because all he can do is not lie, but he can just sit there quietly. It's not like you have to act like a crazy person.
Yeah, that seemed to happen quite a lot. Like he was like you said, not allowed to lie due to this curse or whatever, but he's volunteering all of this additional behaviors and information when questioned about things. Like he could just keep it simple and short and not lie in his response. But then I guess you don't really have Jim Carrey doing his wackadoodle be crazy.
Yep. That's what you don't have. You would just have a straight man giving very short, terse answers to things, trying to say as little as possible, and having everybody else be kind of crazy and trying to prod him for information. And it'd be a complete reversal on the comedy.
Yes. So I just did the thing.
Yes, you just did the thing that you're just talking about. Hey, Pat, let's try and get through some of your notes here, buddy. What do you got for us?
All right, yeah. So everything about that trial was wrong. You have like two different parts. Excuse me. So usually there's a pretrial conference that you have before a court trial proper. Everything that would be argued by each side will have been spelled out either during discovery or during settlement negotiations, kind of the theory of the case. Or you might have motions, like pretrial motions. So nothing would be a super duper surprise. You also, during discovery, you have discovery demands that will say that each party has to share all the relevant information with each side. And I just don't see something like that really getting lost. So spoiler alert, at the end, he wins the trial because turns out she was a minor when entering the prenup. And I don't think that's always a kicker. I don't think that always voids a prenup because the law has confronted this problem before, believe it or not. So it depends on your case law from your different states. But so, yeah, you would not have any surprises like that. I think the judge obviously would have called it before things got as crazy as they did. And that's not how direct examination and cross works. That's also not how like a trial is formatted in terms of, maybe the petitioner, because Jim Carrey's the respondent, which is kind of weird how they use those terms, because at one point he says, respondent calls Kenneth Cole to the stand. And I don't know, maybe I don't know procedurally how divorces work as well as I should yet, because I haven't litigated one. But it was all interesting. I was really struck how Jim Carrey was not very busy throughout this whole thing, because my boss is running around like a chicken with his head cut off all day long. He's in consultations with clients all day long, or he's in court, or he's trying to, like, being a lawyer is like running from one fucking fire to the next, putting it out. That's literally how it is. So fucking Jim Carrey, he has time to pal around with his secretary and stuff like that. And the role of the secretary herself, Greta, I don't know if she was a secretary or a paralegal, because really in the law world, your paralegal is your best fucking friend, because they're the one drafting all the motions. You're working on it with them, but they're doing all the bitch work. There's no way you'd be able to make money if it wasn't for your paralegal. So you treat your paralegal well.
Hey, we're doing a kid show here, Pat. So watch the fucking language.
Oh, we are?
No, I'm just kidding.
Don't scare me, bro. Well, yeah. So keep going. Oh yeah, he sleeps around too. And apparently that's the most accurate part of the film, because big firms, everyone's fucking everyone. Everyone's doing cocaine. I have it on decent authority that I won't elaborate, but that's what happens in big firms.
All right. Well, maybe we should save some of this stuff for our Patreon bonus content that can be accessed at lastnighters.com/Patreon. So we'll go a little bit longer tonight and get more into the cocaine parties. If that's all right. But back to the point that Robert and I were talking about, where Jim Carrey is volunteering all this additional information. I had written in my notes, I called it Tourette's for responding randomly. Like he has this uncontrollable urge to just do something that's ridiculous or say something crazy. And let's see. Oh, yes. This was a question that we talked about in some of the pre-show, where Jim Carrey's talking to Greta, and he says, she tells him about this story where a burglar cut his leg breaking into someone's house and won $6,000 suing the victim. And Jim Carrey's response is, I'd have gotten him 10. And I know we talked about this real briefly in the beginning, but I believe that there was a case of this in London where a man defended himself, or a burglar got injured, like on the glass that he broke entering the home, and the homeowner got sued as a result, and the burglar won.
Pat, defend that shit.
I'd have to see this case, but normally that would be like we were talking about earlier. It'd be, you have a duty to protect known trespassers from. So first of all, I don't think that.
Wait a minute, known trespassers. So say you're Scrooge McDuck, and you've got this giant money bin, and it's a huge draw for any criminal in the world. So he has a known duty to make it as safe as possible for any criminal who wants to come in and steal his money.
Yeah, but you have to take reasonable efforts. Everything reasonable. So the question of reasonableness would be for the jury or the fact finder. But we were talking. You have a duty to protect known trespassers from from known nuisances on your property, known dangerous obstacles. I'm forgetting the term of art that I used earlier. I just don't think that that's foreseeable. I don't think that any of that is foreseeable, that you would be cutting vegetables on your counter and someone might sneak onto your roof and fall through. So like,
what about, isn't there, forgive me, or maybe you can elaborate on this, but I seem to recall a case where a guy was getting broken into his house over and over again.
Yeah.
And he had finally had enough. And so he set up a shotgun trap.
Can't do that.
And a guy walked through the door and set off the shotgun and killed him. Can't do that. Why not?
I think that because the response is unequal to I think it really depends too, because there's also a doctrine of law called the castle doctrine, where if someone is breaking into your house, you have no duty to retreat, right? Your house is your castle. You can use deadly force to repel them, but you can't use deadly force or inflict grievous bodily injury to protect your chattels. That just doesn't, I think it would also be an NAP violation because you're responding to force with an unequal force.
So you're using a proportionality argument there.
Yeah, proportionality. I'd have to look at I remember stuff like this. I think this is just a general font of law.
Well, if someone's breaking into your house and your home and they know you're home, they're not there to sell you cookies.
Right.
Yeah,
but
how do you know? How do you know what it is that they're going to do?
But right, this guy that we're talking about, I believe he knew that his cabin was being broken into, or he knew that the property was being broken into while he wasn't there. So he set up a dangerous trap. Yeah,
in that one case, he had been broken into many times, as I recall, and so set up this trap because he was sick and tired of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's sick and tired of the police being unable to stop it.
Yeah, right. Well, I think he could probably try and trap them in like a cage. Like they
bear trap?
Yeah, right. Well, maybe, yeah. A bear trap would break their leg or something, right?
Yeah, this reminds me of a guy during the the last election cycle. His Trump sign kept getting torn out of the ground, and so he wrapped it in electric wire, I think. And so the next time some leftist tried to steal it, they got shocked or something like that. I think there was some video of it, and I'm pretty sure that the guy got in trouble for doing it, but I don't recall the full details.
Well, that reminds me of our mailboxes. Mailbox outside this house that I'm in right now had been driven over by some, who knows, rampaging hooligan person. And it's kind of like a neighborhood area thing. Like there's multiple mailboxes on this, in this area. It's on this house's property, but everybody kind of contributes. So we kind of build it. And we rebuilt it out of wood, but I was like, build it out of steel or build it out of wood and then have a steel core. So the next person that comes along and runs over their car, smashes the fuck out of their car. Are you saying that I'm in trouble for something here, Pat?
Okay, I'm so sorry. I was researching your last question on Westlaw.
It's the same kind of similar thing. I mean, it's kind of a trap, but it's also kind of just, I'm building a very robust mailbox.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. It really depends on what the case law has to say about it.
Yeah. In your instance, Robert, I would consider that would just be a choice of building materials that would be standard, right? A reasonable man would consider wood or steel being a fine thing to build a mailbox out of.
Well, I don't see, even if I make it out of hit me signs and then the inside is steel, wrapped in steel and drive over me here, it's still a violation of my property if the car drives over and does that, even at my behest.
Yeah.
Is it not?
No, I think
not at your behest. If you're asking them to, you're authorizing it.
Right.
All right. Fair enough. All right. But what if I made it out of balsa wood on the outside and concrete on the inside?
I think
it's a choice of building materials, right?
All right.
That's not like a
new line of questioning. I move to dismiss. We need to move along.
You son of a bitch.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about one thing that they can't do today that they do in this movie, and then let's get into our final summary and review, or any final last minute throw-ins that you got there, Pat. So the biggest note I have left is when he's doing the roast of the partners and the head guy at the meeting, and he's calling everyone a loser, wimp, degenerate, slut, dickhead. The guy who's wearing a hairpiece, he scalps the guy Indian style and then does an Indian war cry. Now, this is a 21-year-old movie, but I have a feeling that Hollywood couldn't get away with doing that today.
Wait, Indian, Daniel? Indian? You mean Native American?
Is Indian not okay to say? I don't even know.
I'm just fucking with you. No, but I actually, interesting side note, the body of law called Indian law, it's literally is called Indian law. That's the term of art. So even the natives use it, Indian law. And I wanted to do a show on this, but the tribal courts actually have their own carved out sovereignty. Of course, the federal government has granted it to them, but they have sovereignty in their certain areas and they have their own court system. It's really interesting. But no, that would never go over today. Hell no. And it's surprising that people don't dig this up from Jim Carrey's past and shove it in his face.
Yeah, apparently anything in the past 36 years is now fair game, right?
Well, he does have left cover, though. Come on, let's be real.
Well, that was what the Bill Maher appearance was all about, probably. Covering up for his past sins.
You have to atone.
All right, well, let's get into the final summary and review. And Pat, you've heard the show before, so why don't you lead us off? You're the lead hitter here.
Black and gold, boys. Yeah, I thought it was great. I would, well, of course, it's one of my favorite movies. It was decent to watch again, but it can sit on the shelf again for another 3 or 4 years before I see this film again. Coming at it from a new perspective of being a lawyer, I suppose, it was interesting to see how wrong it was. I can't watch Law and Order or any of those shows ever since I started law school because it's just freaking ridiculous, man. But I don't know. It doesn't age well. As a child, I remember this movie is like a 9 out of 10, but now I think maybe a 5 or a 6, unfortunately. So still black and gold. What do you guys think?
All right, well, I'll go and then we'll let Robert finish her out. You'll be the cleanup hitter, Robert. So yeah, this movie, I remember liking it when I first saw it back when it came out in 1997. I was a big Jim Carrey fan at the time. Dumb and Dumber, Ace Ventura. There's something else he was in. The Mask I did not like. Oh, The Cable Guy. I loved The Cable Guy, and critics panned it. People hated that movie, but it's so dark and it just has like a streak of humor in it that is far different than this slapstick, pie-in-the-face over-actor stuff that we see here. The script in this does just seem to want to contort itself into just getting Jim Carrey into whatever position he can be in to be ridiculous. The script in the story is pretty bare bones. The concept that we talked about where family courts tend to seemingly, to this layman, seem to side with the women in the majority of the cases is a pretty interesting thing because that is like one of the crucial the main point of the movie, in that Samantha character thinks that she's entitled to winning this case because she's a woman. And he even appeals to that when he's trying to get her to hire him. He says, and I have it written down here, he says he appeals to her collectivism by referring to her being a strong woman and not of the weaker sex, that women are capable and strong and all of these things. So what the heck was I talking about? That I think that this is one of the reasons why we see things like the MGTOW movement, the men going their own way. And I have a quote related to that. This is in a book called Men on Strike. And it says why men don't marry. Because there's nothing in it for them. What exactly does marriage offer men today? Men know there's a good chance they'll lose their friends, their respect, their space, their sex life, their money, and if it all goes wrong, their family. They don't want to enter into a legal contract with someone who could effectively take half their savings, pension, and property when the honeymoon period is over. Men are wimping out by staying unmarried or being commitment phobes, and unfortunately, they're being smart. So that's pretty damning, and I think that's a result of this monopoly provision of justice that tends to skew in one direction over the other and not have an equal application that they allude to when you hear about law and justice and equality and scales of justice and equal application, all these things. So anyway, that just kind of is one side point I want to make about this. But just in general, the movie, I think, doesn't play well 20 years later. Jim Carrey, not a big fan of him in this movie. I think that he was just being Ace Ventura wearing a suit. So I'm going to go with like a 4.0 on this and pass it over to Roberto.
Well, the MGTOW, you make a lot of good points, both of you guys. Daniel, I'm going to kind of run off what you just said. The MGTOW movement, and I'll just pontificate on my own understanding of it. And it's Yeah, it's not just that women can take you for everything based, once the honeymoon's over, and that women have this idea that, once love is gone, then it's time to move on to the next love scenario and the next love connection. And a lot of people, marrying for love, and it's not necessarily, marriage is hard. Marriage is a commitment, and it's a partnership. And it's this idea of romantic love is the end all and be all. And sense of entitlement that women get, and probably men get too, but yeah, like in the movie, the woman feels entitled to more because vagina. And, due to the nanny state and welfare system, women can get by just fine without a man in their life. And it creates a woman, in general, of course, speaking, that doesn't necessarily need to make the best judgments as when she's picking who to marry, who to spend her life with. Because if this guy doesn't work out, not a big deal. Don't have to put in a lot of work. Not to say that women don't put a lot of work in marriage. I'm not saying that, but there are definitely women out there, and the incentives create them. I'm not saying that these people are just bad people, but when you have incentives geared towards, not necessarily needing to just, pick the best guy, not necessarily needing to pick, the best contraceptive method, or being careful, or making sure that the guy's going to stick around. You've got the big baddie state who's got your back and will be the daddy in the situation. And it's led to the destruction of families and all kinds of horrific statistics that are a Google search away. I mean, all kinds of suicides and just the worst kind of behavior from single parent households. And it's a real terrible scenario. And more men are committing suicide. Like they're like 80% of suicides. It's terrible. Anyway,
it's called no fault divorce. And that's
there you go.
I'm surprised this hasn't come up yet in this episode. No fault divorce. And even my family law professor who all my professors were lefty, skewed left. But even she said, is it a good idea that we got rid of no fault divorce? So for those who don't know, no fault divorce, and the reason why they're fighting in this trial itself is because of this concept of, well, what are you need grounds to get divorced. One of the grounds is infidelity or abandonment or abuse or all of these other things. So you used to have a good reason to get divorced. Now, all you have to do is demonstrate that, quote unquote, the marriage is irretrievably broken. So there you go.
Right. So anyway, the movie itself. So anyway, yeah, the world we live in is a real sad situation. And those kinds of facts can be found very easily. And I recommend, if you're interested in this, to seek that out. But the movie itself didn't age well for me. Jim Carrey's slapstick. I mean, this is coming from a Jim Carrey fan. From back in the days of In Living Color, when he was Farm Marshal Bill, I thought he was absolutely hilarious. And, when he came on with Ace Ventura, I thought he was still hilarious, and other people didn't know what to make of him. There's a famous feud between him and Tommy Lee Jones, where one time Tommy Lee Jones came up to him at a restaurant and said, "I can't stomach your buffoonery," which is just classic. So that's clearly what Jim Carrey basically is. And he had his long run of comedy where then he went to more serious stuff with like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and had a quite successful run at it. But now he has come out as a avowed socialist, which is not really surprising in terms of the typical Hollywood actor person. I think there's a lot of just general bubble aspects to leftism and socialism. There's also probably a fair amount of peer pressure, but there isn't a lot of sound economic advice being chattered about at your typical Hollywood party, in my guesstimation. But this movie, let me just give it a rating. I'm not going to give it a black and red. I'm not going to give it a black and gold. Our old rating situation that Pat has resurrected. I appreciate that, buddy. But I am going to give this just a 5. It's just a movie. In its day, it was probably closer to an 8. Probably made me laugh a lot, but on rewatch, it was just not really anything. But it didn't do a whole lot of things like totally wrong. It had like character arcs and, good real human emotion of abandonment and, that kind of things, and people making sacrifices for the family to promote their career, which are things that people can really identify with, I think. So, it's not the worst movie, but it is really kind of just like a slapsticky old Jim Carrey movie. So that really struck me strongly. I was like, wow, this movie's really kind of slapsticky. I didn't realize that Jim Carrey was a slapstick comedian, but now looking back at it objectively, he's definitely a slapsticky comedian. So yeah, 5.0. There we go.
All right. Well, very good. And I think that's going to about wrap it up for us here on The Last Nighters. And this is episode 40 of the show. So the show notes can be found at lastnighters.com/40. We're going to get into some Kathleen Turner Overdrive after this. You can access that on our Patreon at lastnighters.com/Patreon. And Robert, I think the next movie we're going to do is going to be about Nazis and ANCOMs, if you're down, that Patrick Stewart vehicle called Green Room.
Oh yeah, we just saw that movie up at your little plague cabin. I'm down to do it.
So we'll do that one next. It's sort of in the horror genre, and we're in the October season now, so it feels appropriate, and I think that there's a fair amount to talk about based on our reviewing. So we'll be doing that next. Pat, we really appreciate you being a guest with us here on The Last Nighters. If you wouldn't mind just throwing out your website and how people can follow your work, and then we'll say goodnight.
All right. Thanks, guys. Yeah, always a pleasure to join you again. Everyone can find my work at libertyweekly.net. Otherwise, you can find my work at thelibertarianinstitute.org, where Scott Horton has been gracious enough to allow me to publish my work. And I have some very exciting changes that are coming to the show, and I'm very excited to announce them, but it probably won't be until November until that really kicks into full effect. If you'd like to support my work, please head on over to patreon.com/Liberty Weekly, and there you can find the bonus content that we're about to partake in, and a bunch of other bonus content that I've done. I've added a tier at $1 per month where you can get a shout out on the show and an email from me. Also, all my ebooks, which we also discussed in the overtime content as well. But was really a pleasure, guys, and looking forward to the next time.
All right,
as are we, man. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for The Last Nighters. So good night from last night, everyone.
Peace out, everybody.